Yes. Let's look at where problem-oriented policing stands today. How do you think it's really taken hold?
That's a tough and very difficult question for me to answer, because it's now been, what, about 25 years since this got going.
Yeah, well, your article was 1979. So.
Right. So it's exactly, we wrote 25, 26 years. We've learned a lot. Some of the lessons are very powerful lessons, and I hope we'll be able to talk about that.
Well, should we talk about those now? What are the most important?
Well,
All right.
Let's hold that for just a moment, and just let me try to respond to your question about whether it's taken hold. It's up and down, up and down, up and down. There are departments where you have leadership that takes it some distance, and then the leadership leaves, and it disappears. There are departments in which just a corps of operating police officers get committed to it. The administration knows nothing about it, but they accomplish miraculous stuff and get recognized for it.
Again, illustrating your point we talked about earlier, sometimes the other people in the organization don't know what's going on in the other part.
And we've had some departments that were identified nationally, internationally, for their problem-solving efforts, but with a change in administration, there's not much happening there now. And then we've had some that have been fairly consistent and have a strong commitment and have survived changes in administration. That is, the concept has survived.
What does it take within a department to ensure that continuity? Clearly, it's leadership. I mean, the chief executive.
Leadership. It's how many people are really committed to it in the ranks. For example, I have an illustration now. One of the problem-oriented policing was introduced in the UK and probably has taken a stronger root in the UK than it has in the United States. Under Sir Kenneth Newman, the London Metropolitan Police had several projects, not unlike what we did in Madison, in problem-oriented policing. But as far as I know, it hasn't taken root in that department. But Lancashire Constabulary made a commitment to this some maybe 12 years ago or so under one chief constable. Continued under second chief constable Paul Stevenson, who's now the new deputy commissioner in London. And I'm told just by correspondence this week that their middle management is continuing the commitment. And they are so committed that they have an annual conference on problem-oriented policing, at which their own personnel show their wares, display their accomplishments of the past year, and they have competition within the department for who has engaged in the most problem-oriented policing. So, from among all the agencies that I'm familiar with, the Lancashire Police have the strongest commitment and have shown the greatest accomplishment over a continuing period of time.
So it's really an international phenomenon at this point.
Yes.
Is there?
There's problem-oriented policing that has been going on in some substantial volume in Australia, Norway, Sweden, the UK, here, and in a few other countries.
What are some of those powerful lessons that you referred to that we now have learned?
They take two forms. One is, what we've learned to give us more insight into what we can do about the policing function. The other is what we've learned about the impediments. As to the impediments, I'd say what we've learned is future progress depends upon leadership, and we suffer in that area because the turnover in leadership and policing is so rapid. Right. The lack of analysis, in-depth analysis, and the skill and the capacity to do that, and the failure to develop, at least in this area, closer university practitioner relationships and feedback. And maybe we want to elaborate on that.
Well, there are plenty of research projects where academics are involved in some research project with the police department. But that's not quite what you have in mind in terms of this analysis and problem solving.
Yeah, my criticism of that, and I have watched for all these years the development of the whole discipline, and the commitment to studies relating to policing, from the early explorations, Barr Foundation, Al Reese's efforts, etc., to this day. And my disappointment is that relatively little academic research has focused on specific problems other than those that become politically sensitive, like domestic violence, child abuse, sexual assault.
Use of force, traffic stops, racial profiling.
Right. That crises define them, and then they get attention. But there's relatively little in the curriculum or research agenda of the academic enterprise that draws student attention otherwise, and research attention, to the handling of specific issues, specific problems. And I think that because of that, there isn't the generation from within the academic field of authoritative, knowledgeable, pieces that contribute to a body of knowledge on which police can draw to improve their capacity for dealing with graffiti, for dealing with identification theft, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That just hasn't happened over the years.
And that relates back to your second point about the lack of a capacity for analysis in so many police departments.
Right.
Do you see that analytic unit or the problem-solving unit as a special unit within the department, or is this something that you sort of farm out in some relationship with the university setting? What's missing here?
There are various models that have been tried and used. Unfortunately, if it's done outside, then it's always outside, and it's not internalized. I see no reason why police departments shouldn't develop their own internal analytic capacity. But to do that, they have to isolate it from the other stuff, or it gets subsumed, it gets used up in responding to the problems of the day. You got a serious homicide problem, so you bring in the analysts to work on that, and they're drawn away from the long-range commitments.
Or if there's a budget crisis, this is the first unit to go because you want to have...
Exactly, because you can't have empty holstered cops. You have to have get everybody into a uniform so that they can be out there doing their thing, and that, I think, is dysfunctional. I think it's very short-sighted in that it says the important thing is to have as many people out there, but we're not as concerned about what they're doing. Whereas I think the investment in an analyst has... I would, for example, argue that when we were in the era of the 100,000 additional police, that used to bug me, because for every X number of police officers added to a police department, there ought to be an analyst to make sure that those people are being used in a way that is effective and has a direct impact on the ultimate product of policing.
Yeah, the 100,000 officer concept is sort of the old more cops.
Add more cops.
More cops, more patrol,
job, right?
as opposed to...
Without the thought processes that are involved in what we do with cops, right, and what we use them for.
Have you thought about ways in which police departments can develop this internal... assuming the leadership and assuming there's no budget crisis, and you've got of developing these kinds of units?
I've written a piece in which I've argued that there ought to be one of the most effective things that the federal government could do would be to systematically inject thought processes into police departments by providing their funding. Because it's difficult to argue for this at the local basis. They'll say, well, why do we need this person? There isn't somebody else doing this. And if we could have a critical mass injection of analysts in departments, and if they shared their experiences and their knowledge among them, we could quickly demonstrate the contribution this would make to improve policing. And there is a project that has been launched along these lines. Currently, there is a project under Mike Scott's direction in which he has the funds for, I think, 3 or 4 analysts who he has placed in departments. One of them is, some of the funding is in Chula Vista, California. Some is in Madison, Wisconsin, in an effort to demonstrate that putting an analyst in a department. The other major effort along these lines is the Joe Dando Institute in London, under Gloria Laycock, is doing a much more thorough job of training police analysts and equipping them to function in police departments. And I think one of the most significant things is that there will, within the next few months, be published a manual on problem analysis in crime analysis, which is an effort to educate these people about what is involved in analyzing problems.
Tell us about Mike Scott and his center.
Mike is another former student of mine who has a very unique career of having Madison police officer, and then Harvard Law School graduate, one of the assistant legal consuls in New York City, served in several different capacities, was a chief of police in Florida and executive assistant to the chief of police in St. Louis. So he has a very varied career that has, and he is strongly involved and committed to problem-oriented policing. He now is back at the University of Wisconsin, where he heads, in collaboration with the university, the Center for Problem-Oriented Policing.
And they have produced a series of guides on different problems.
This is a major current project of great international significance, because these guides are not only in published form like that, but they are available on the web, on Mike's webpage. And the significance of this, in a nutshell, is that up to now, we've been thinking of police departments having the capacity to do a case study here, very spotty, get an insight and share that insight with others. And that hasn't quite taken as strong a form as I would have hoped, in terms of the volume, in terms of the sharing, in terms of journals. Mike is doing this in reverse. He's commissioning people to look at specific problems and go into the literature and find out what we do know from the academic community, from police departments, from the case studies, synthesizing that, and in sort of a state-of-the-art saying, this is what we know about graffiti, this is what we know about street prostitution, this is what we know about panhandling, and this is what we know about assaults in and around bars. And there's going to be, I think there's, between what's been written and going to be published, will be around 60 so far. And these are generally available, and our hope is that this is the beginning of a building of knowledge to support true professionalism in policing.
So in terms of disseminating POP and the concept, and PERF played a major role, certainly late 70s, early 80s, and now the center at University of Wisconsin under Mike Scott is a national
focus, I think. It's
resource center.
Yeah, right.
So do you think POP has a future?
I'm optimistic and I'm pessimistic. I'm optimistic in terms of the potential. I've come to realize that you name the problem in policing today, whether it's an abuse problem, whether it's an efficiency problem, whether it's relationship with community problem, and I think if I can push you to look at that problem in the context of specific problems, that you will come out more satisfied and more productive than if you just examine that problem in the abstract.
And you're pessimistic?
My pessimism is that the progress has been so incredibly slow, in that there are police and there are police in this country. We tend to think of them all as uniform, but there are police departments that are at the cutting edge, and there are police departments that are operating in the dark ages. And there are other pressures on police. The current pressure to deal with terrorism, important as that is, has sidetracked a lot of these efforts to deal more effectively with substantive problems. And with limited resources, limited personnel, I understand the police chief who listens to some of what I have to say and says, and can express great enthusiasm, but also says it's not realistic.
Right. Well, looking back over 50 years, you can really see the tremendous transformation of American policing. From when you first went out, that in 1956, our understanding of what police do it was just uninformed, really. And you've really played a major role in all of the milestones, from the Bar Foundation survey to the Resident Crime Commission, the very first experiments in problem-oriented policing in Madison and in Newport News, and now the institutionalized center at the University of Wisconsin. It's been a remarkable career. You've made a tremendous contribution to policing. I'm cautiously optimistic, and I want to thank you for sharing this experience with us.